All right, guys, so here's the recap of the first trig quiz we took. Remember, trig is short for trigonometry. That's the stuff we talked about with the SOHCAHTOA. So I'm going to write that acronym at the top just so we can keep track of it. That's the sine, cosine, tangent stuff. We wrote down opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. All that stuff was this quiz. And this quiz didn't do anything with inverses. It was just the basic trig stuff, kind of when we first learned it. So I'm going to go through those 4 problems, and hopefully that'll refresh your memories a little bit. Overall, we saw really, really positive scores, really great positive reactions to the trig unit. So we're really proud of you guys overall. First thing to remember is you got to figure out which angle you're using. They give you 32 degrees, so that's obviously our focus kind of angle. Well, what side is opposite from 32? So if you're not sure, just kind of draw an arrow going from 32. And you're going to hit this side. That's the opposite side. Adjacent means next to it. Now, there's 2 sides that are next to it, but one of them is going to end up being the hypotenuse. Remember, the hypotenuse is the one across from the 90-degree angle. 90 degrees is right here. So this is the hypotenuse, and this is the adjacent side. So those are our abbreviations for that. Now, there's only 2 sides that actually have something written on them. We've got x on the opposite side, so I'm going to circle that one. And we've got a 16 on the hypotenuse side, so I'm going to circle that one. If I look up here at my abbreviations, my SOHCAHTOA, SOH stands for sine, opposite over hypotenuse. CAH is cosine, adjacent over hypotenuse. Let me write those out. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that kind of helps us remember which one we can actually use. If I'm doing opposite hypotenuse, the only one that fits that is the sine. So it's got to be sine. SIN is the abbreviation for sine. And you always put the angle next to the trig, so it's sine of 32 degrees. And it says sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Well, the opposite side is x. So that's going to go on top. Hypotenuse is 16. That's going to go on the bottom. So that's the setup for it. Now we just have to do the math. Well, it's pretty close to a proportion. If I just put this over 1, because sine 32, if you type it in your calculator, you get a number. If I put any number over 1, makes it a fraction, and it's still equal to what it was. Now I can cross multiply. So I've got x times 1 in one group and 16 times sine of 32 in the other. X times 1 is just x. And now I have 16 times sine of 32. Now you got to be careful how you type this into your calculator. If you've got a TI-30X, if you look up at the top and it says TI-30X, you can just type in 16 times sine of 32 in that exact order, and it should come up with a nice answer. However, if you're borrowing one like mine, the Casio ones I believe they're called, you have to go a little bit backwards. On the ones we're using in class, you got to type in the 32 degrees first, then hit the sine button, and then multiply by 16. So you got to be kind of careful what you do. Don't do 16 times 32, then hit sine, because then you're going to get 32 times 16, that angle, the sine of that. You don't want to get that. If you do it correctly, you should get 8.48. I'm rounding it to 2 decimal places. It's 8.478, which means it rounds up this last number. So x is equal to that if you do it correctly. Feel free to pause and rewind and look at that one again. I'm going to move on to the next one. 73 degrees is our angle this time. If I go across from it, this is the opposite side. Hypotenuse is across from the 90. So it's here, this long side. And then adjacent means next to. So it's next to the 73 degrees right there. Only 2 sides have something written on them. That's how I can tell what trig I'm going to use. I pick the trig based on what sides I circle. There's an x on the opposite side. There's a 13 on the adjacent side. So check my SOHCAHTOA up here. Which one uses opposite adjacent? That would be the TOA. T stands for tangent. and we abbreviate it TAN. Again, degrees goes next to the trig, so 73 degrees goes next to tangent, and it's O over A, so opposite over adjacent, x over 13. Just like the last time, I'm going to put this over 1 so that I have a nice fraction to work with. So I'm going to do x times 1, 13 times tangent 73 on the other side. This is how we do cross multiplying. One group goes on one side, the other group goes on the other side. X is by itself, so I don't have to move anything around. I just have to plug in 13 times tangent 73. Again, if you're using the nice calculators, the TI-30X, you can just type in 30 multiplied by tangent 73 in that exact order. You should get 42.52 because it's 521. The 1 does not round up to 2, so it stays as it is. If you got one of mine, type in 73, hit the tangent button, then hit times 13. You should get this number as your final answer. If you're struggling, ask a teacher for help. We can all usually figure out how to use the calculators and get them fixed. Make sure you're in degree mode, by the way. So make sure there's a DEG at the top of your calculator. If you're having issues getting that, that might be why. So again, ask a teacher if you need some help. All right, moving on down to the last two. Again, start off with your labeling. We've got 46 degrees. Opposite from the 46 degrees is here. Opposite from the 90 degrees is the hypotenuse, so that's there. And the adjacent side is that third one. Remember, you're only using two of the sides. There's a 16 on the adjacent side, so I'm going to circle that one. There's an X on the hypotenuse, so I'm going to circle that one. Scroll back up to the top or look at the top of yours. SOHCAHTOA, adjacent hypotenuse. The only one that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is this middle one. A and H means cosine is my trig function to use. Oops. Hopefully it stays scrolled down. Just doesn't want to scroll. There we go. Cosine. Put the angle next to it. Cosine 46. Now be careful. It is not always X on top. Remember, it's SOHCA because cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it's going to be a little different when we solve it this time. We're going to still do the same process, but it's going to be a different typing in. Still put cosine 46 over 1, but this time X is not just by itself. So we're going to have to do a little bit of extra work. 16 times 1 is 16. That's in one group. The other group is X times cosine 46. Those of you that get confused as knowing what your equation should be, you always set it up based on SOHCAHTOA. And you always are cross-multiplying with these types of problems. That's how you know what should go where. You circle and you look at what's in the same group. X is being multiplied by cosine 46. Well, what's the opposite of multiplying? Dividing. So I'm going to divide both sides by cosine 46. It's going to get rid of it over here, which means I now have X by itself like I wanted. And if I type in 16 divided by cosine 46, I get 23.03. Again, if you're using one of the nice calculators, you can just type in 16 divided by cosine 46 in that exact order. If you're using one of the weird ones, you're going to type it in like this, 16 divided by. Then you're going to have to do cosine 46 backwards. So you're going to do 46, hit the cosine button, and then you're going to hit equals one last time. You should get this answer. Okay, again, 16 divided by, hit the 46 button, and then hit cosine, and hit equals to finish it off. Last problem we're going to do, you notice that it's a little different than the rest of them. What are we missing? We're missing an angle. If they don't give you an angle, and you're not looking for an angle, remember we're looking for a side. If you look up at the top of your paper, it says find the missing side. If they do not give you an angle and you're not looking for an angle, don't use trig. Trig involves angles. Don't use trig. You have other options, okay? What is it that we learned when you have two sides of a right triangle given to you and you're looking for the third side? What theorem is that you learned back in middle school? A squared plus b squared equals c squared. That's Pythagorean theorem. Again, if they don't give you an angle and you're not looking for an angle, don't use trig. Pythagorean theorem is what you use when you have sides and you're looking for a side. Now be careful with this. You do have to be specific about where the hypotenuse goes. That's always in the C spot. I know it's the hypotenuse because it's across from the 90 degrees. So 15 has to go in place of c squared. So it's 15 squared on that side. The other ones don't particularly matter because they're the legs. So I'm going to put x squared plus 6 squared. But it is very important that you put the 15 on this side. X is not always going to be that one on the right-hand side. Squared means multiply it by itself. So 6 squared is 36. And 15 squared is 225. From here, it's just algebra. I want to get x by itself, so subtract 36 from both sides. Those get crossed off, which means x squared is equal to 189. We had a lot of people get stuck here. You're still trying to get x by itself. It says x squared. That means x is not by itself. What's the opposite of squaring? The opposite of squaring is taking the square root. Whatever you do to one, got to do to the other. So take the square root of 189, round it to 2 decimal places. You should get 13.75 because it's 747, and that 7 makes it round up. Okay, and check in your picture. Does it make sense for 13.75 to be this side? Yeah, it does. The longest side is supposed to be the hypotenuse. It's smaller than 15, it's bigger than the 6, so it's in a good range. That's how I can kind of check and make sure that it seems reasonable. Feel free to rewind, pause, get notes caught up, ask a teacher if you don't know how to plug in some of this stuff, and hopefully that helps you get ready to retake that quiz.